crucial tool.
Using Twitter, YouTube, texting, cell phone videos, any social media they can to mobilize and tell the world what's happening in their country. It's a communications revolution with global implications for repressive governments trying to control the internet and social networking.
Well, Ken, the FBI has raided an apartment in Queens, New York, belonging to a man named Elliot Madison. This after police arrested Madison here for using the social networking site Twitter to communicate police actions to protesters.
Over the weekend, a planned upgrade to Twitter was even postponed in the interests of democracy for Iranians.
Now, two of the activists are charged with using cell phones and the social networking website Twitter to help protesters avoid getting rounded up by police.
This is about giving their voices a chance to be heard.
I order all those assembled to immediately disperse.
When police confronted protesters in Lawrenceville on the first day of the G20, they had many non-lethal weapons at their disposal, including SWAT trucks and OC gas. But police say the protesters had aides of their own, text communications telling them where the police were and how to avoid them. They said it was coming from a man named Elliot Madison of Queens, New York.
Without Facebook and Twitter.
So you get the idea of the kind of hypocrisy between the two. I should say, too, that the raid was, just to give you an idea, this is not just some local police kind of thing. This is our home, and I say our home because there was a number of people living there, a bunch of animals also. Our home was raided by the Joint Terrorist Task Force, was raided for 16 hours, and we are still possibly under grand jury investigation, though we were never indicted for any crime, but they still possess all of our computers and cell phones and things like that. Apparently all because of this kind of activity that was 2 months earlier praised by the Iranian protesters for doing this. But regardless, this is an example of a crisis that they're seeking to manage, whether it's the government of Moldova or the government in the U.S. I mean, this should not be news to you that repressive regimes want to manage information at all costs. So now I'm going to turn it over to Hack Block people, and they're going to talk about some ways that they're working to get around this.
Hi. Hackblock got together a while back and developed this piece of software called Tapatio. It was being developed right around the same time that Ushahidi was coming out. There's some unique requirements when you're developing a project not in a corporate environment, and there's some expectations that you can't take for granted. For example, zero development budget. This has been my experience. So you're going to have to figure out a way to keep the code coming and pay rent at the same time. Another requirement for the project was to dispatch information to people, requiring zero budget for the end users as well, meaning that like ham radios or other type of shortwave phones or radios would be prohibitively inexpensive. It was a requirement that it would be very easy for people to get this message without having to fork over a lot of money. Also, there was a requirement that there was a CRUD interface, like a create, review, update, delete, that's common with many blogs. This way, it provided for an environment where a team of operators could sit and collect information from people out in the field, out in the streets, review it for accuracy and so on, vote on it, categorize it possibly, and then finally send it out to people who are interested in specific types of information. There's many informations that come in during a big mobilization, and you may not be interested in all of them. You may only be interested in, like, when am I getting fed? Or where are the police, or what's happening in this section of the city. So, or medics may be interested in where are people hurt that need help. And there was another assumption actually too that like, and so we, as a result of this, we ended up deciding on Twitter on the back end because it provides a nice API to SMS interface, which wasn't really available in other applications. Like Identica provides a similar microblogging interface, but it doesn't have a built-out SMS backend. So we decided to use Twitter, but one of the situations was that we knew that there was going to have to be a lot of requirements. Like people hadn't heard of Twitter, like they had never used of it. So concepts that may be familiar to people, like direct messaging or using @ and then username to get messages visible to people, aren't necessarily going to be intuitive. People are going to have difficulties with things like using underscores. So you know, like. It's important to like not make assumptions of other people's tech uses. So we had this assumption that they wouldn't necessarily know how to use these things. Tapatio is probably going to be around for a little bit longer, but it's probably going to phase out in support of the Ushahidi project because there's already support for Android, iPhone, J2ME devices on handsets for collecting and dispatching not just text information, but graphical information about where things are happening. You can find out more about and the Tapatio, it's a Drupal module. It runs on Drupal because Drupal already provided like the basis for a CRUD interface, and it allowed a way to authenticate operators and stuff like this. And it shortened our development time. Next. Skunks are awesome. Next. So I have some reflections on deployments and developing in these scenarios. If you have experience developing for a company that has a development company, you may have some of these ideas already ingrained on you. But if not, they can be hard to learn, and you can end up learning them by providing services or tools that ultimately can't be used because there's a failure along the way. And oftentimes in development, there's as some developers out here may know, you're going to be testing yourself as you're writing the code, and bugs aren't going to come up, but then you deploy the application, and next thing you know, like everything goes down and nobody can use the service. So it was really important that we didn't have any single points of failure or SPOFs. Centralization is really bad. Especially, and the other situation with developing these types of software is, especially with a security concern, is your security is not always the same. You might not be worried about like hackers and bots attacking your net. You're specifically worried about organizations and institutions that have lots of money. They have a political system. They have a legal system. They have guns, and they're authorized to use whatever force they need to at times to stop what you're doing. So centralization in this case, if somebody finds out, if your servers find out where it is, they can just come in and shut it down, and then communications go down. That's bad. You don't want that to happen. Mutual aid is something that can be really helpful, and this goes into like not redesigning the wheel. Leveraging other people's tools and building a relationship within their development communities, submitting bugs to them, to their projects, and letting them know about what you're doing with their tools will be really helpful when you run into a situation when you start finding bugs at the last minute and you need help. If you build this relationship ahead of time, the people that you're working with will be more likely to come back and help you find the bugs that are happening out. Test load of the application ahead of time, plan ahead as much as you can. Security should be designed to protect the users. Don't invite snitches into your space. This can be easier said than done, but you can set up security policies, and the people that you're working with may already have security policies. And knowing what those policies are, and if you have a secure space, keeping that space safe. Like don't invite somebody into your space to help out with the ham radio who is like never set anything up, who is later going to turn over the whole ham radio operation over to the feds. And ham radios may be a little bit outdated anymore. I don't see any reason why we should still be, or low power FM radio or pirate radio stations. Nobody really has an FM transmitter anymore, which is unfortunate, but actually these can be really useful in other situations, like what Smokey was talking about, crisis situations, so I guess it really depends on your deployment. But anyways, don't invite snitches in. Project managers are awesome. We had a great project manager in the development of Tapatio Impact. I'm not sure, they may have had to, he just left. But he was a great project manager. It helps out, especially if there's not many developers helping you out, to have somebody to back ideas off of as you're developing, and to make sure that like all the project requirements are getting done on time. Oh, secure remote access. There may be situations and deployments where you need to send physical computers for a deployment. You may not be like the on-site sysadmin for one of these applications, and you may need to send boxes into a hostile environment where police are confiscating things, taking hard drives, and so forth, and so making sure that you use full disk encryption. And Hackblock has a number of tools which I'll make sure that go up on the notes that I guess are going to be downloaded from are available from the HOPE website, that when you deploy the site, that the person who receives it will need to have the password for decrypting the drive, but then once it comes online, it will call back in through a Tor service and set up a remote shell on your control server. There's some of the techniques that actually aren't even used in botnets. I don't know if anybody went to the CrimeWare presentation yesterday, but you know, secure ways to get out and not disclose the information of where the control and command is. Next. Raccoons are neat too. I like those. Next. So the March Hare Communications Collective is a collective that is hoping to provide communications tools to radical communities, and not just to radical communities, but they'll possibly also be able to use in other times of crisis. Right now, it's going to be built on Ushahidi Swift River, which Smokey mentioned. Part of the Tapatio project was collecting in information from Twitter from people who had subscribed to certain feeds, and using trying to do our own type of crowdsourcing as well, like to get information from people who were posting information. But Swift River, they've built in a bunch of AI. They have a much larger developer base, and so we'll be using that and customizing those tools. And like I said, there's already support for clients on smartphones, and granted, smartphones aren't super accessible now because of the price, but I think we'll see that as we go into the future that the prices are going to drop, and almost all phones now support J2ME anyways, and there's clients available for those phones. More information about March Hare can be found at marchhare.org, and we're looking for help. And like, there's all sorts of ways that you can help. You don't have to be a sysadmin. You don't have to be a developer. Maybe you can install an application on your phone. Maybe you can install an instance of our customized software that we're going to be writing on your computer and give us bug reports. Bug reports are awesome. Patches are even better. Also, like, I'm not very good at graphic design or outreach. Like, maybe you want to be a cheerleader for the project. That would be great too. We need help writing docs, general tech support. Maybe you're like a very specialized developer and you know a lot about some specific technology. Maybe you could get in touch with me afterwards and you could be like, hey, I know about this technology, and if you need help getting up and running, this seems like something you might want to be using, you can talk to me and I'll offer support. Next. Oh, badgers. That's all I have. Ringo?
So, can everyone hear me all right? 15 minutes. Thank you. He kind of ended his talk by talking about giving back to the community here and getting involved, and I want to kind of talk about how the hacker ethic plays into the way we relate to each other as a hacking community. How many of you consider, obviously you all consider yourself to be labeled as hackers, right? Or most of you? No hands? A few. All right. How many of you consider yourselves that hacking is a hobby to you? How many of you make mad bank doing hacking? Right on. So, hobbyism to me is something that's fun. It's like an activity you do. Like you might play a sport, or you might, tinker with things. And to me, that's a hobby. And I think hobbyism is the tendency to make hobbies completely isolated from everything else that's going on in the world. I think a really good example of this is Burning Man, where you have. Has anyone here been to Burning Man? Oh yeah. All right, cool. Burning Man's a festival where everyone goes out to the desert. They drive hundreds of miles. Sometimes they take bikes or crazy contraptions over there, and there's no monetary exchange. Everybody just brings a skill they have. Maybe they're good at cooking. Maybe they're really good with massages. Or they know medical work, or they can set up a radio system. Everyone kind of brings their own skills to it. And anyone who's been to Burning Man will tell you it was a life-changing experience to see a community that runs like that.
And it only costs a couple $1,000s these days to get there.
Exactly.
We're getting into that.
And in order for Burning Man to be, and at the end of Burning Man, they burn, everything. They destroy all the things that they brought because they want to get rid of the attachment people have to their belongings, which is, kind of noble. But what's really sad about Burning Man is that you have all these people with all these amazing skills and all this inspiration and apparently a lot of time on their hands who spend exorbitant amounts of money, exorbitant resources, many times not even their own resources from their community, bringing parts that were used